It really is irritating that people think it's a kind of slow burn happening elsewhere. This is happening now, it's happening everywhere.
If we think about it, we all have someone in our family that is probably only here because they had that short course of antibiotics that saved their lives.
We've got this crisis, we have this rise in antimicrobial resistant superbugs. Why don't we just make some more antibiotics? Hello, and welcome to Behind the Science with GSK and me, Dr. Katani, where we unpack how today's discoveries are shaping tomorrow's health. And we are kicking off with one of the biggest and baddest health threats, and that is antimicrobial resistance, or AMR. If you've been paying attention to the health news, you'll know the scale of the global threat from antimicrobial resistance. We're looking potentially at millions of deaths every year by the time we get to 2050. What we want to do today is really unpack what's going on and see where the good news is, where things are actually happening to turn the tide on superbugs, whether we're doing enough, and what still needs to happen. And to do that, I'm joined by two fantastic guests. I'm joined by Professor Alison Holmes. She's Director of the Fleming Initiative. Hello.
Hello, Kat. Thanks so much. It's really great to be here.
And we're also joined from GSK by David Payne, who heads up infectious disease research. Hello.
Hi, Kat. Wonderful to be here.
Thank you. I want to set the scene by reading a quote from Alexander Fleming himself. And in the New York Times in the 1940s, he said, "The thoughtless person playing with penicillin treatment is morally responsible for the death of the man who finally succumbs to infection with the penicillin-resistant organism." Now, that idea of thoughtlessness, Alison, how has thoughtlessness got us to this point today?
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is it was all there. He said it. He discovered it in, his lab in Paddington, and in his speech and in the articles he wrote, he stated that, and that is the situation we're in. And, as a infectious diseases physician, all my work depended on being able to use antibiotics effectively. I mean, what we have been able to do, what I could see in terms of life-saving related to antibiotics, treating patients and delivering healthcare, it's just miraculous. So we have got this most incredible resource that our healthcare depends upon, and yet we have squandered it. And we need to recognize that the development of resistance in bacteria, in any organism, is a Darwinian feature. It's evolutionary. So any exposure to an antibiotic will drive resistance, whether that exposure is an appropriate one or an inappropriate one. And we need to be careful about that because antibiotics are everywhere. They're being used in the environment. They're being used in food chains. So we also need to think about that. But the most important thing we can do as a society is to think carefully about how we do use them so that we can maintain their effectiveness. And one of the most important aspects of that is, of course, preventing infections to start with. Because if we prevent, we can minimize the use and exposure.
So as a scientist, my question comes to you, David. We've got this crisis, we have this rise in antimicrobial resistant superbugs. Why don't we just make some more antibiotics?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we should be doing. But bacteria are incredibly ingenious. I really mean this when I say it. Bacteria have been on this planet for billions of years. Humans have only been on this planet for millions of years. So bacteria have had a much longer time to work out how to build defenses so we can't kill them. So they're really tough to eradicate. My personal experience in this area and really the inspiration to work in this area came to me from my PhD. So when I started my PhD advisor told me I was going to work on a new resistance mechanism. And I went away to the library and I found there were 5 strains in the entire world that produced this particular resistance mechanism. And as an overconfident PhD student, I went back to my advisor and I said, I don't think this is going to be a very good project. I don't think there's much to see here.
Not challenging enough, come on.
But he was right, because if we now come on to the present day, that resistance mechanism is called extended spectrum beta-lactamases. They probably cause multi-drug resistant infections in every hospital, in every country, all around the world. So that's gone from an academic curiosity to something that, frankly, has devastated an entire class of antibiotics. And that really illustrates how formidable bacteria are and how well they can defend themselves by whatever we make. And that creates huge challenges to us to create new antibiotics.
And I think that really demonstrates the speed of this as well. I'm sure it was only a couple of years since you did your PhD, but how fast are we seeing the emergence of new resistance mechanisms? We bring in an antibiotic and then we see the emergence of resistance to it. How fast is that cycle going?
I would say it's faster than we're replenishing the pipeline. So if we look at the pipeline of all of the antibiotics that are in the industry pipeline for antibiotics, we count around 27 that are addressing the highest priority pathogens as defined by the WHO and CDC. Now, when you dig into that 27 a little bit further, only a handful of those are actually in advanced clinical studies and work through an entirely novel mechanism that bacteria haven't seen before. So this is really quite concerning. We're just not keeping up with the threat.
So bacteria they evolve, they see a drug, they evolve a way around it, but we're still coming at them with the same kind of weapon effectively.
In some cases, and that's what we need to address. We should have many more antibiotics in our pipeline as a society than we have. And there's lots of challenges to why that hasn't happened.
I do just want to address the feeling that maybe antimicrobial resistance is a slow burn. It happens somewhere else, other parts of the world, and that it's not really a big problem. I mean, have we actually, as a global community, grasped the scale of the problem here?
So what you said, Kat, I actually find really irritating. I mean,
Sorry.
it really is irritating that people think it's a kind of slow burn happening elsewhere. I mean, I've spent a long time working in the NHS. I've spent a long time with colleagues within infectious diseases and infection control. This is not a kind of slow burn happening elsewhere. This is happening now. It's happening across Europe. It's not just an issue of the kind of global south. It's happening everywhere. So absolutely that low and middle income countries have the greatest impact is there, but across low resource settings within countries, there's of course a massive problem, and balancing the risks of when do you think it's acceptable to close a neonatal unit down, for instance, because the risk of not having that, or when is it acceptable to close a cardiothoracic theatre down and the impact that will have. When is it appropriate to close a transplantation unit down? I mean, and there's plenty of evidence across Europe about programs that have had to be curtailed or halted for a while because just the risk is too great. The other kind of crisis that's happening in parallel that I just want to mention, which I think is really important, is the notion of what we're facing in terms of climate change, because that's going to make the challenge and the importance of antimicrobial resistance even greater. Because with climate change, there's more risk of infection, transmission for all sorts of reasons related to what's happening with climate change. So, on the one hand, it's not a slow burn; it's happening now. And on the other hand, the advances being made in modern medicine will not be realized because it'll be too risky because of this.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, Alison, I mean, the way we think about antibiotics, if we don't have powerful antibiotics, we can't realize the great advances we're making in complex surgeries that can improve people's lives and save people's lives if we don't have antibiotics to protect them while they're going through those surgeries.
Yeah.
I think we're all really excited about the incredible advances we're making in treating cancer. It's very real. We're getting much better at that. But we're not going to realize that benefit if we do not have powerful antibiotics that can protect and treat people when they're in that most prone phase, vulnerable phase of when they're immunocompromised.
So, looking at this challenge from a scientific perspective, I want to sort of geek out a little bit. What are some of the things that you and your team are thinking about when you're trying to understand these bugs and find new ways to tackle them?
Well, I feel very privileged. I work for a company that's never stopped working on this problem of AMR for the last 70 years. We've never stopped working on it. And I think we have one of the biggest portfolios and pipelines of molecules that are addressing AMR, something in the region of 30 projects. 12 of these actually address some of the pathogens that the WHO and the CDC declare as the highest unmet medical need and most problematic pathogens. Our scientists are continually discovering and progressing whole new ways of how to protect patients from these infections and how to treat these infections. And we're addressing things as common as urinary tract infections that could be resistant to the available antibiotics, pneumonias, which is a very common bacterial infection, meningitis, which can be just a tragic disease that people can get, and also gonorrhea. So we're very proud of the portfolio that we have and what we're progressing forward in this area. But there are some really, really big scientific challenges that are in our way to be successful.
Now, you said earlier that basically bacteria have had a billions of years jump on us,
Yes.
evolving these mechanisms of resistance. How can you try and get smarter than a bacteria?
Well, one of the biggest challenges that we face is dealing with multi-drug resistant gram-negative pathogens. They cause a lot of mortality and morbidity because they're often resistant to multiple classes of antibiotics. This is a very complicated organism. It's tiny, but it's complicated to create an antibiotic for because it actually has two barriers, two membranes. So if we're thinking about a new antibiotic, we've got to engineer something that is going to get through those two membranes, those two barriers, and they're different. So they probably need different qualities to get through both of the membranes. And then there's these efflux pumps that can just pump the antibiotic straight out again.
Oh, clever.
So you've actually got to design a molecule that would be optimal to get through the two barriers and avoid being effluxed. And this is some of the things where we're looking to apply state-of-the-art AI/ML to really broaden our understanding of how to rationally design small molecules against gram-negative pathogens that we hope will deliver new classes of antibiotics for gram-negative pathogens.
Because I guess we're in an era where we have genome sequencing, we can understand the DNA, the molecules that make up the sort of the machinery of the bacteria, and then I guess figure out exactly where you need to hit it to stop it from working, make it die.
Yeah, that's basically it. And it sounds very simple in the way you're saying it.
I mean, I don't know why you haven't done it already.
It's enormously challenging. And let me give you an example of exactly how challenging it is. So the first bacterial genome was sequenced more than 30 years ago. It's a long time. Genomics came early for bacteria. Now, when you get the whole genome of an organism, it kind of tells you the whole library of different ways to kill a bacterial pathogen. You kind of know all the targets and all the different ways to kill the bacteria. Prior to the genome, we only had a handful of different ways. Now we had literally 100 different ways of killing a bacterial cell. And we know that GSK and two other large pharma companies actually progressed 200 projects on entirely novel targets that came from that genomics revolution. No approved antibiotics came from that work. And I
Oh, wow.
remind you, it was 20 to 25 years ago. That's a long time ago.
That must have been annoying.
It was very annoying, but it was a massive effort. And we still, as an industry, haven't worked out how to make that whole process of discovery and progression of new antibiotics as a highly efficient process, which is where we need to apply new technologies like AI/ML and new approaches to try and really improve that whole process.
And is it going to be just one drug, one molecule that can do all these things? Or are we going to look at needing to combine different drugs with different mechanisms of action to actually get around some of these
Well,
evolutions?
absolutely. One of the things that we found, the same molecule hits two different
Ooh,
antibacterial
two for the
targets.
price of one.
Yes, that's right. That becomes really important because in actual fact, what that means is the bacteria has to change two things to become resistant to it, which is much, much harder than just changing one thing. So that's absolutely built into our strategy to try and hit multiple targets, which bacteria find much harder to get around.
So everything that David is saying is so exciting. And in terms of the science behind looking at how we can combat the bacteria, but just want to remind people that actually we need to think about the person that's harboring the infection and potentially the resistant bacteria. because all of these drugs, whilst they're killing off the bacteria, we have to make sure that they're non-toxic to the human. So unlike other drugs, which are for the human, these have to knock out the bacteria, but without damaging your kidneys, your liver. And it's really important, or your hearing.
Alison, you're raising the other enormous challenge that we face. I've just been focusing on how you kill the bacterial cell,
Yes.
but we have rigorous evaluation of any new antibiotic. It's critical, and that creates its own set of challenges. So you're always in this sort of compromise. You've got this thing that works really well, it kills the bacteria, but if it's not safe enough, you've got to
Back to
find
square
another one.
one.
And we're hopeful there could be some AI/ML
Yeah,
applications
yeah.
to this in how we find these molecules that have the optimal activity against the bacterial cells. So we're very optimistic as we go forward with this that all of these things are going to come together and improve our success.
I find it fascinating, some of these technologies, about how they do enable us to learn and say, okay, that sort of thing does this, looks like this, works like this, and then you can apply that to
Yeah,
a whole
yeah,
range of other problems as well.
yeah,
It's very powerful.
yeah.
I do want to pick up a bit on the idea that we are developing these drugs, we're having these drugs, but the challenge is maybe we don't want to use them. So is prevention better than cure here? Now, Alison, surely it is better to stop people needing these drugs in the first place.
Absolutely. So whilst David's talking about the really exciting molecular stuff, intracellular work and amazing microbiology, just want to really emphasize the opportunities with prevention. And it is absolutely critical that we prevent infections, which means that we will need far less antibiotics and there will be far less exposure at an individual and also at a population level. And it's the basics. We absolutely need to have clean water, adequate sanitation, and we need our healthcare to be safe and minimize the acquisition and transmission of antimicrobial resistance and infection. I mean, in a way, we've designed the perfect systems for transmission and acquisition within our healthcare system. One figure that I always find interesting, which is that at least 1 in 5 of the antibiotic prescriptions in hospital are because of infections that have happened within hospital.
Right.
So I just think that that's another figure that we should be reflecting on, particularly when we're thinking about, you know, healthcare and the safety of healthcare, but also how we need to preserve safe healthcare and do whatever we can to minimize and prevent infections within it. But one thing that we really need to stress, and we collectively need to think about this and keep on promoting it, is the role of vaccination. Absolutely critical, the role of vaccination in terms of preventing infectious diseases, minimizing the exposure, whether it's necessary or not, to antimicrobials. So the message around vaccination has to be maintained and it has to be strong.
I do just want to pick up on a little point there, because there's been quite a lot of public health messaging over the past few years about don't get antibiotics for a viral infection. And we have vaccines against COVID, against flu. How do vaccines against viral diseases help with antimicrobial resistance against bacterial diseases?
So the thing is, unfortunately, people still do. And across the world, many, many people are getting antibiotics for viral infections that are completely unnecessary. And also, it raises another issue, which is about diagnostics. If you don't have access to diagnostics either, you may end up getting antibiotics anyway. And globally, when you turn up with a fever, whether you've got cold symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms, whatever, you without diagnostics and without necessary access to all the support that's needed, the quickest thing may be for people to access antibiotics. So it's really kind of holistic and comprehensive, the role that vaccines can have in diminishing the presentation of febrile illness and then the need for, and then the potential exposure to antibiotics, but also sometimes there's secondary infections as well.
Or like you get a bacterial pneumonia if you've got flu or something like that.
Possibly. But the main thing is diminishing any presentation where there could be any doubt that it could be bacterial infection.
because most of the infections are caused by respiratory viruses. So if you can remove that, that's where vaccines, even for viruses,
Yeah.
remove the opportunity for that patient to get they've stopped the patient getting the infection, so it removes them going to a doctor and the doctor feeling they have to do
Yeah.
something about it. So it would decrease the level of antibiotics being used. So they have a role in the holistic kind of treatment of this area.
I think I did see a study where if there's a peak in viral infections, you actually then get a peak in AMR after that as well.
Yeah, because it coincides with more people going to physicians and getting misdiagnosed with antibiotics, and that drives AMR. So I think vaccines for respiratory viral pathogens are really important as part of this as well.
So we're building up a picture of infection control, so people not catching infectious diseases, people being protected from infectious diseases through vaccination, and then having drugs as a last resort, really, that you should treat people who definitely have a bacterial infection. But I do want to touch on the economics of this, because if we're using these very powerful new antibiotics effectively as a last resort, how do we persuade people to actually, develop them and pay for them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. The economic challenge actually comes from doing the right thing. So when you create a new antibiotic, they're often kept in reserve. Now, you can understand that for the company that has made that antibiotic, that's going to delay the return on investment. And the impact of that is very clear. Many companies no longer work in this space for that reason, and even small biotech companies struggle to really thrive in this area. So it can be very challenging. I think what we need is policy changes in how we deal with this problem, and we're very hopeful that governments and countries think of very different ways of dealing with this challenge. There's an interesting statistic that some modeling's been done that if we had the right incentive environment for antibiotics, and that was in place this year, within 10 years we could see something like 70 or so new antibiotics in the pipeline that could lead to up to 18 approvals. So, I think this is an economic challenge that we face, and it's really a big challenge that we need to get right.
But one of the other things is about the societal recognition that these are treasured resources, and we have to be custodians of these incredibly precious resources. So I think at the same time as the economic argument, you have to have the societal buy-in, understanding, and the societal demand as well.
I think it's recognizing things like the economic argument. This is actually a way of securing each nation's,
Absolutely.
economy,
Yeah.
their health. You spend money on defense to keep your country safe and well, and your people looked after. And this does seem like something that's incredibly important, but it is a global challenge. It's not enough for each country just to go, well, this is my thing, because the one thing COVID did teach us, infections do not stay in one place. They can travel around the
It
world.
affects us all wherever we are in the world.
Absolutely. So really important that not only do we think locally and nationally, this has to be a global endeavor to work together to do what we can to minimize exposure to unnecessary antibiotics, but also make sure that people can access effective ones when needed.
We can't just sort of science our way out of this. This is going to take political change, societal change.
I do think if we can do better with societal awareness and the youth and next generation, that will be critical in terms of pushing the societal demand. And there's some really nice work that the Fleming Initiative has done with educational leaders across the world around this, which is really good to see. As I think the young are
Get
going
'em
to be
while
the
they're young.
answer,
Yeah.
or in their teenage, they'll put the pressure on.
Well, it's a similar approach, I think, in the climate change world, where it's children and schools have really, really grasped this and taken it forward. So yeah, hopeful for that.
Yeah, I think I'm working in this area. You have to be an optimist.
Otherwise, why would you get up?
It's too challenging otherwise.
I do want to talk a bit more broadly about how the Fleming Initiative is addressing some of these challenges and working to actually change the picture of antimicrobial resistance.
So the Fleming Initiative is a really fantastic endeavor that I'm really proud to be the inaugural director of. And the work of the Fleming Initiative is to bring people together and bring expertise together to focus on this and use the legacy of Fleming and his lab in Paddington at St. Mary's as a focal point for the very best of research, but also as a kind of global focal point around let's not squander this incredible discovery. And across the science and innovation piece, artificial intelligence is a very strong aspect of it. And it has just been incredible to have this partnership with GSK, which is going to advance research so significantly. And it brings the best of science, but it also brings the best of a range of expertise working together.
So I was delighted that we made this investment in the Fleming Initiative, and the funding is being used to focus on what we think are six of the biggest challenges that we face to be successful in this space. And that £45 million is going to be used to support something in the region of 50 positions, academic and scientific positions in Imperial College, which is hugely important. We need to incentivize and encourage people to spend their scientific careers on this problem, so that's a great thing that we've achieved with that. Furthermore, working with the great academics in such as Alison and her colleagues at Imperial College, and we get the opportunity to work with those world-leading academics coupled with the GSK industry expertise, really creates a different sort of team to tackle this problem.
And one of the other challenges, I guess, is just that this is not really a field that people want to go into. I found some figures that there's about 3,000 researchers globally working in AMR, and that's fewer than working in HIV. And compared to like 15 times more, there's about 46,000 researchers globally working in cancer research. All of this sounds super exciting. You're taking the data. How do we get more people to go into
These
this?
figures are very, very real. I mean, I think we all know that there's far less people working in this space, and I think all of these challenges all play together with respect to that. So that's why we're delighted that we're able to do that and create these scientific positions.
So, what would you say to a young person, a student interested in science, to try and convince them that actually this is where it's at? This is the kind of science that is really exciting and really worth going into a career in.
Yeah, I always come back to reminding people of the incredible power of an antibiotic. When you think about it, a lot of medicines people have to take their entire lives to get the benefit of them. But antibiotics are often only given for 5 to 10 days. And I think we probably, if we think about it, we all have someone in our family that is probably only here because they had that short dose, that short course of antibiotics that saved their lives. And that's what you can be part of if you work in this area.
Yeah, my own dad, he had sepsis a couple of years ago and was very, very seriously ill. And when you hear the horror stories about resistant infections and then seeing it took a long time for him to get better anyway. But if we hadn't had those drugs and he hadn't had access to that care.
So to be part of that and discovering new medicines that have that kind of impact on mankind, just as Fleming did all those years ago, I think is a really exciting opportunity. It's what I've always found very inspiring.
It's the best area to be in, the most important, will have global impact, and this is where the most talented people will be. And infectious diseases doctors are also the cleverest and best doctors because
And the best looking.
and, because I just actually wanted to not be just facetious, but actually it's a really amazing field because do remember your drug is against the bacteria. It's not for the person. So you have to be, you're not a single organ doctor. You're not just looking after the lungs, the kidney, the heart. You have to be a whole systems physician. But not only that, you have to be able to understand what the drugs do to a bug and what the drugs do to all of the organs in the system. Furthermore, you need to understand the context, the transmission, the social determinants of health, so many aspects, as well as being able to look after a whole person and not a single organ, and also understand the microbiology and the pharmacology. So you need the brightest and best.
You're making me want to go back in the lab now. Start my time again.
Come and join us.
Get
Come
back
and join
into
us.
infectious disease. Now, reflecting on everything we've talked about, it does sound like maybe if we're not getting ahead, then we are starting to catch up in what we need to do. So both of you, what does give you hope that we can turn the tide on AMR, David? I'll come to you first.
You know, there are some things to be optimistic about. I think, for example, the collaboration we have in Imperial, where I actually think that we're focusing on some of the biggest challenges, the right challenges, that the whole objective here is to improve everybody's success in this space. So all of the data and all of the discoveries from this collaboration we have with the Fleming Initiative, we will make that information public, because we think it's really important that everybody has to be more successful in this space for us all to thrive. And also from our company perspective, that we've actually progressed, and I spent a lot of my career doing this, an antibiotic through an organization all the way to approval. It shows you can do it. You can do it. There are a lot of challenges to that, and we're blessed with, you know, just incredible experts in our company that have enabled us to do that with great resilience. But we've achieved that, and I think that starts to build confidence that you can do it again. And there is a path forward if you're really clever and focused on creating an antibiotic that is genuinely going to make a difference to people's lives. My concern is if we don't scale around all of these challenges. So, for example, if we don't see these new commercial models for antibiotics, if we don't get behind some of the really tackling some of the key scientific challenges, I think we're going to lose the opportunity.
Alison, what gives you hope? Do you have hope?
I have hope. I really do think there's success stories around. There's national programs. There's some incredible stuff that's also been done in livestock. There's some, amazing successes in terms of stewardship programs in countries around the world, and also the data that came out in the Lancet, which showed in terms of the global burden of disease, which still showed a shocking and probably completely underestimated burden, but it did show a major reduction in terms of AMR in neonates, which was incredible to see.
Sort of newborns,
Yeah.
the smallest children.
Absolutely, absolutely. But of course, that was not due to new antibiotics. That was due to prevention in terms of hygiene and vaccination programs that have contracted the burden in the youngest. But what is worrying is it's increasing and increasing in the elderly, and by the elderly, I think it means the over 55s, by the way. But it was really incredible to see the contraction of the burden in neonates, but it's still far too high. I mean, it's still shockingly high, but there was an improvement there. And just, away from the data around patients, we need a kind of antimicrobial literacy or understanding, like you were saying about there is for climate change. There needs to be the societal awareness and demand that it is unacceptable to squander the use of these incredibly precious commodities. And we need to do our best to protect each other as well as a society and recognize that this type of investment is absolutely critical.
You don't see people going on protests for AMR, do we?
It'll happen.
Maybe. I could talk about this all day. I'm sure you definitely both could. But sadly, we are out of time. So I would like very much to thank my guests. We have David Payne from GSK. We have Alison Holmes from the Fleming Initiative. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed our conversation, please do leave us a comment or a review. You can share this podcast with someone else who might like it as well. I will be back next time going behind the science. So until then, take care and stay curious.